the Steam Deck once again. In my previous video on the subject, you may recall some of the things I said about this device and how great it is as a gaming device, plus how great it has been for the industry as a whole. I absolutely adore this device and everything that can be done with it. For those of you who watched my last Steam Deck video, however, you may be thinking that if all of this was covered in my previous video, well, why on earth am I here right now making yet another video on it? Are you clickbaiting? Are you abusing the new attention that your channel has gotten? Let me answer those questions for you, Mr. or Mrs. Very Smarty Pants. Short answer, yes, I absolutely am doing those things. No, don't all you leave, please. I wasn't done answering, I swear, okay? Short answer, yes, absolutely. Long answer, not exactly. Before I really get into this video, I just wanted to thank everyone for the overwhelming support I got on my previous Steam Deck video. There are hundreds of comments and views and whatnot, and the comments are really good. They're from people putting in their own 2 cents, saying why they love this device, if I help them get this device, and saying that these videos are informative or funny to them. And that is exactly what I'm trying to do with these videos, so thank you. Also, ignore the fat hole that I've got in this glove. You know, it's we don't have budget here on the Gception channel. Like, just live with it. However, you know, all of that aside, thanks again, but let's get right into this. Let me tell you a small story, you know? It was about 6 to 8 weeks ago, roughly. I don't actually know. I know this is my story, but there are going to be some holes here and there, just so bear with my idiocy. One night on a crisp autumn evening, I was sat playing some Vampire Survivors on my lovely little Steam Deck that you can see before you. I was called upon for an errand which required me to step away from my very intense gaming session in my very expensive and comfortable gaming chair. I did the normal thing of pausing the game and then pressing the power button at the top of the device to put it into sleep mode. Except, there is a twist in the tale. The button wouldn't work. It took about 4 or 5 attempts of the button to, pressing the button for it to actually work, and so, this obviously wasn't a great thing at all. And after said errand, I took a few minutes to think about it, and how this has actually been happening for a little while. It was never as bad as it was then, but definitely noticeable enough for me to think of the problem as me not pushing down the button hard enough. It also occurred to me that it shouldn't really matter how hard I push the button, as long as it clicks. I contacted Steam support later that night, and the next day they got back to me basically saying that, yeah, this device is fucked in some way or another, and if you want it fixed, then you gotta send it back and we'll fix it for you for a price, as you are out of the warranty window. Or, if you're not a dumb fuck, you can fix it yourself if you have the skill. Obviously, I'm pretty stupid, as you will go on to see if you don't know already. While these obviously weren't the exact words they used, that basically covers what they were saying. You may be thinking that with me being the absolute galaxy brain I am, however, I was probably, able to fix it with no issues whatsoever, right? Well, no. Of course not. This is a Gception video. This is me. I didn't fix it straight away. At least not for a while. I did get it repaired, but we'll talk about that later. I know this has been a fairly long story, but it gets to the subject point soon, I promise. If you saw my last video all the way through, then you may remember me mentioning why devices like the Steam Deck and even my Switch and PS Vita are so important to me. The reason for those of you that either didn't watch it or simply don't remember was that they ease my crippling anxiety. It's quite weird with things like the Steam Deck and whatnot, because I usually hate sticking out and looking strange in public, but I don't really care how I look, if I have one of these sitting in my hand and I'm just gaming away on it. That is how important these devices are for my day-to-day whenever I go out. This can either be to a family member's house for the holidays, or even just going to my local Greggs and scranning on a sausage roll while CEX tests out something I'm selling. They are very versatile devices, and so when I was informed by Valve themselves that my Steam Deck was indeed faulty, alarm bells instantly started going off in my head. And while the Steam Deck itself was still functioning fine and everything worked great when it was on, the problem was getting it on and then turning it off again. As I said, this had been noticeably getting worse over the past few months, and I knew it wouldn't be too long until it stopped working for good. I instantly thought about a replacement deck, just something I can get to switch it out with this, and then sell this one to recoup some of the cost of the new one. I didn't really want to do that, however, as I still absolutely love this device, as it has carried me through some rough days, and it was actually still a launch model. I wasn't just about to give that up. Even if it meant keeping this its case is just a paperweight, at least I still had the first of its kind, and so if I was going down this route, I didn't really see the point of getting another deck, as I would just have 2 of the same decks laying about, and so another Steam Deck was out of the question. Plus, I didn't actually have the cash to just outright buy another device like this, and so because of this, I had to look at retailers that had a monthly finance-based option instead. This then led me down the rabbit hole of getting a competitor device, and now I know you're all punching your screens with extreme force, shouting something along the lines of, "Well there, Mr. Gception, you said you hated the competition as they all ran on Windows, and Windows bloody sucks on handheld. Why are you doing that then, you absolute pillock?" And yes, you'd be absolutely correct with your judgment. I do still hate Windows on a device such as this, but with the criteria I'd set myself, I didn't really have many options, and with this, I bit my tongue and went on a search. I managed to find 2 that I could buy by simply adding the cost to my phone bill every month. I recently cancelled the plan I got with my old smartwatch that came with my phone a couple of years ago, and so about £30 was freed up on a per monthly basis. I used this to my advantage by thinking that something that costs about £60 a month was basically just adding another £30 to the bill, which I was more than happy with doing, especially with how important these devices are to me. £30 extra a month was very easy to pay considering this. I decided to go with, obviously, EE. They were my phone bill, and they have a sort of store for these kind of things. So, looking at their online store, they had 2 models available. They had the Z1 Extreme variant of the ROG Ally for sale, along with the Lenovo Legion Go. After doing a bit of research of specs and people's personal opinions on what device they prefer overall, I came to the conclusion that the ROG Ally was actually the better fit for my preferences overall, and so I ordered it. And the next day, it came. Now, don't lie. You fully expected me to just pull this away and slap down an ROG Ally on the table, You fully expected me to do that. You just plop one down on the desk and get running with business, didn't you? Well, unfortunately not. I am the biggest fucking idiot in regards to this story, but I think it kind of worked out better in the end anyway. After opening the device and recording the unboxing to use in the first draft of this video, I got to work installing a form of SteamOS that was called Bazite. A few people mentioned it in the comments sections under my last video, so thank you to those people who brought it to my attention. It is an absolutely fantastic bit of software, and I wouldn't have found it nearly as quick without you beautiful lot telling me about it. I didn't even boot into Windows on the Ally at all. I just turned the device on, saw that it was working, and then got to work with upgrading the SSD that was originally the upgraded SSD that I put in this. Once Bazite was installed, I set tons of games to install overnight and left that doing its thing. Once I woke up, first thing I did was jump into a nice game of Mad Max. It was a game that I had played and completed on my Steam Deck before, so I knew that it would run perfectly fine. I just wanted a decent testbed to see how the controls felt. And they actually felt pretty great, considering the considerable downgrade in ergonomics that the Ally had when compared to the Steam Deck. After a few minutes of play, however, I noticed something wrong. I noticed that Max would just punch out of nowhere. I had no clue why, but I thought it was a minor misfire and so continued on as normal. And unfortunately, it happened again, and again, and again. Let me just take a brief second to go over something, Let's say, hypothetically, the same thing was happening to you under the same circumstances. What would you do? Would you try an external controller to see if it's the controls in the device itself playing havoc? Would you test any other games to see if the issue persisted? Would you even search some online forums to see if this is an isolated issue, or whether it was a normal thing everyone experienced? Well, I can safely tell you that I did absolutely none of those things whatsoever. My humongous galaxy brain level of intelligence just straight up assumed that the device was faulty, and so I immediately tossed it aside and went looking for another device instead. I don't know if I'm fully coping here. I mean, I probably am, but anyway. I think that my panic just immediately set off when I thought something was wrong, just as it did when my Steam Deck started playing up. While unfortunate, I am kind of known to just going the nuclear option before checking the smaller things first. No idea why I do it, but I'd rather just do the one thing that will more than likely definitely work instead of some smaller things that might not, if that makes sense. This whole situation occurred quite early in the day, however, so I properly got myself up, got back on the grind of searching for another device I could use. My phone plan provider was unfortunately out of the question, as I had already taken the Ally out on a plan, so adding another one until I got this returned was really just not going to happen. I had to look elsewhere. That's when I came across it. After an hour or so of tirelessly searching, I found it. I'd looked on a retailer I often frequent for, when I ever need new tech and whatnot, and that beautiful place is Curry's. For those of you that don't know, Currys is a retailer in the UK that basically just specialise in tech products of all calibers. It's probably the only place on earth I know of in which you can go in empty-handed and walk out with an RTX 4090, a Sony Bravia TV, and a Samsung microwave. Fortunately for me, however, they had one handheld PC model available. It was unfortunately a little more pricey than the ROG Ally would be, but I already had a finance agreement with Currys, and so getting one would be really easy. The one they had, you ask? Well, it was this lovely fine device, the ROG Ally X. Now, I know that this is in fact no longer the best handheld on the market, with such things as the One X Player, One X Fly F1 Pro now being released, but considering you'd need to take a second and third mortgage out on your premium London accommodation just to buy it, I'm not really considering that an all too consumer-friendly option just yet. This device, however, is still an absolute beast, and I love it to bits. Now, you might have the question you had earlier about me hating Windows handhelds, and again, yes, that definitely still applies, but now that I've seen a device as premium as this, Windows isn't nearly as bad as it used to be on the Steam Deck back in the day, or even on the crusty Neo 2021 I had before this. It's still a far from great experience in my opinion, and I will talk about that later, but for now, let's just continue with this. While I wasn't exactly spoiled for choice, considering that this was the only handheld Currys had for sale, I'm glad that it was this one that they had. Granted, I had only used the regular Ally for about a day, but that was enough for me to get used to how it felt and handled. I was already familiar with the BIOS and the controls among other small things. I know that these are incredibly small things, but it made getting used to this device a lot easier. It wasn't a smooth ride, however, far from it in fact, but we will get onto that shortly. I just want to go over the specs of the Steam Deck, the regular Ally, and this powerhouse as well to see how they all fare up against each other. The Steam Deck, as everyone knows at this point, uses a custom-built AMD RDNA 2 APU meant to run perfectly in tandem with Valve's brand new release of SteamOS. Granted, in the big year of 2024 and soon to be 2025, this APU is really starting to show its age considering some of the other handhelds like this that are now on the market. This isn't such a huge problem, however, as yes, while the lack of power is definitely noticeable, it still works when you throw most things at it, and so it's still a very viable option for a lot of people, including myself still. You can even get some more modern and intensive titles running on this with a few tweaks if you're willing to put in a bit of work in both the in-game settings and within the config files. There's still a lot of life that this little device has in it, and it's clear that it won't be going anywhere anytime soon. This little RDNA 2 chip is seriously powerful considering what it is. After doing a bit of research, it seems as if people are comparing the little RDNA 2 APU in this thing to something in between a GT 1030 and a GTX 1050 performance-wise. These cards nowadays are absolutely abysmal, but still definitely hold their place when used in the right circumstances in things like competitive titles or less intensive indie games and the such. The Z1 Extreme chip, which actually features an RDNA 3 equipped Radeon 780M GPU that is seen in both the ROG Ally and the Ally X, is a lot more powerful, however. Research indicates that the performance for this chip is said to be comparable to something more like a GTX 1650. While the 1650 still isn't a great card in 2024, like the 1030 and the 1050, it still has its place and can be used effectively given the right circumstances. Regardless, however, the 1650 still shits on the 1030 and the 1050 in comparison. The margins won't nearly be as big or consistent between the two devices, however, as the hardware, while comparable with these cards, isn't exact, so there might be some cases in which the performance gap may be smaller or bigger depending on the type of game you're playing and the type of operating system you are running. Before you all type it, yes, I am also aware that there is a variant of the ROG Ally that just has a regular non-extreme version of the Z1 chip. I couldn't actually find any retailer selling this over the Z1 Extreme version, however, so I believe it's basically just been discontinued in favour of the slightly upgraded Z1 Extreme variant. I don't know, however. I wouldn't recommend getting one of the regular ones over the Z1 Extreme variant anyway. You'd be better off just paying a little bit extra and getting the better version. The Z1 Extreme Ally is it's fairly cheap nowadays in comparison to this and this, so you know, you'd be better off just getting that one. I'm pretty sure there's a reason as to why I couldn't find the regular Z1 variant anymore. Now, the RAM is actually quite interesting in comparison with these two. Considering that both the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally have 16GB of LPDDR5 RAM, with the Steam Deck LCD sitting at 5,500 megatransfers and the OLED being 6,400 megatransfers, the base ROG sits equal with the Steam Deck OLED at 6,400 megatransfers as well. As I said in my previous video, while this difference may appear to be pretty large, the gaming performance between the LCD and the OLED is going to be marginal at best. The ROG Ally X, however, has instead got an extra 8GB of RAM, sitting at a nice 24GB overall. This RAM also runs at a nice and speedy 7,500 megatransfers, which is quite a bit faster than the regular LCD and slightly faster than the OLED and the regular Ally. This sort of increase, however, will definitely have more noticeable effects over gameplay, but the main increase in performance is definitely due to the extra RAM you have at your disposal. The Ally X actually sets the UMA buffer size to 8GB by default, which is pretty crazy, because then you have the 8GB that is being used as VRAM, but you still have the 16GB left that these devices would have as default. That's just crazy to me. Considering that both the Ally models we're talking about here use the same Ryzen Z1 Extreme APU, the performance difference that extra RAM gives is actually kinda crazy good. Not worth upgrading if you have a regular Ally in my opinion, but very, very good nonetheless. I'll go over my recommendations later, however, so do stay tuned for that if you want to. I don't want to go over it yet, however, so, let's just continue. The Steam Deck actually takes its first win here, with the OLED variant having the biggest screen of the three by a whopping 0.4 inches. And take it from me, you can do a lot with an extra 0.4 inches. Unfortunately, I can't show you the size difference as I don't own an OLED model, but if you're like me, then there's definitely something you own that is that exact size, and that should help a bit. The screen size is unfortunately the only win for the Steam Deck here, as both the LCD and OLED models feature a max resolution of 1280 by 800. This is absolutely fine for what the Steam Deck can consistently output, but as I stated in my last video, that 0.4 inches does lower the pixel density ever so slightly. And so while it might not do loads to lower the quality, the same settings might appear a little bit worse in some scenarios. The ROG Ally and the Ally X negate this issue, however. They both share the same size screen as the Steam Deck LCD, coming in at an absolutely gargantuan 7 inches. I am insistent that nobody needs over 3, but apparently I am wrong in these things. The ROG Ally and the Ally X, however, both come installed with a 1920 by 1080 LCD screen. While yes, OLED does look a lot better with the far better colour contrast and the deeper blacks, the higher resolution screen that is featured on both Ally models do more than enough to counter this issue, as the image is just so incredibly sharp at that 1080p resolution. Now, there might be some scenarios in which you have to lower the in-game resolutions to get some better performance, but even if you lower it to 720p, you can still get a very good looking game, as the smaller screen sort of negates the quality differences a lower resolution will provide. It can be a real lifesaver in some titles, and I would explain why the 1080p LCD is far better than the 800p OLED a little later on. I also completely forgot to mention the refresh rates of these, so let me quickly do that for you now. The LCD deck is the worst of this bunch, having a maximum of 60Hz on the display. This is perfectly serviceable for the games that will play on this, however, and as I said in my previous video, the display bottleneck can actually work in your favour, as you can lower the TDP limit further, allowing for increased battery life at zero cost to your performance. The OLED model of the Steam Deck increases this limit by 50%, allowing a maximum of 90Hz. While this is a nice increase, the lower power of the deck doesn't really allow for many games to truly take advantage of that nice OLED screen to reach 90Hz. A lot of them may struggle to reach 50 or 60 FPS, and so 90Hz in my opinion is definitely quite superfluous to what the deck can consistently provide. If you're someone that just plays older games or less intensive indie games, then maybe it might be a shout, but for the most part, there really isn't a major point to the extra 30Hz that the OLED can provide. For the ROG Ally and the Ally X, they both actually share the same display. You may think that because this is an updated version of the Ally, the display should have been upgraded, considering, a display is a very, very important feature on a device like this, and that's a fair enough opinion. I, however, disagree with this, and think that while an upgrade might have been nice, the display actually works incredibly well. It's so overkill for the normal Ally, and so there isn't really any need to do any upgrades with it. It works perfectly fine. Both models feature a lovely, nice and smooth 120Hz display, which again, while nice, shares the same problem with the OLED Steam Deck in the fact that this device is meant for 1080p play, and so the chances of you being able to get more than, say, 70 to 80 FPS on games in that resolution is fairly slim, and so that refresh rate is not going to be hit in a lot of scenarios. I personally don't even use 120Hz on my Ally, as I believe that the 60Hz is just fine for these games, and I would rather take a stable 60 FPS over a slightly stuttery 80 to 90 FPS. Again, just like with the deck, this gives me much more headroom to lower the TDP limit of that Z1 Extreme chip, allowing for extra battery life. That's just my personal way of doing it, however. You may want to strive for that 120 FPS all the time, and that's perfectly fine. I just personally don't see any major use for it outside of the UI and some menus. Now, when it comes to storage, the ROG Ally models and the Steam Deck models are fairly equal. The storage is upgradable on all of these devices, and so these specs can be easily improved. But for little Timmy, who doesn't even know what the word upgrading means, the stock storage sizes can definitely impact someone's willingness to purchase a product, especially something like this. The LCD deck features 3 models, with the cheapest one starting out at 64GB of eMMC storage. I don't believe I explained what that meant in my previous video, so let me briefly cover that for you now. Embedded Multimedia Card, or eMMC, is a much cheaper method of storage that you will see in devices such as your average mobile phone or tablet, It's even the main type of storage featured in the Nintendo Switch. Sometimes it can be fitted into an M.2 NVMe slot like it is on the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally original, or it can be soldered directly to the motherboard like it is in a lot of mobile devices like phones and tablets, and I'm pretty sure the Switch as well. Luckily, it's the former on the Steam Deck, and that's why the 64GB model is actually still a very popular choice for a lot of people. The speeds on eMMC storage, however, are not nearly as good, with the average speeds for both read and write sitting between 200 and 300 megabits per second. This obviously makes them a far cheaper option to use in devices like this, and considering that they are still pretty decent methods for things like phones, it can make them a very appealing choice of storage overall. It's sort of like having SD card storage built directly into a device, if you will. Obviously, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes in a device than that, but, for an easy comparison, I would say that's perfectly serviceable. That's definitely the main reason as to why the most entry-level model of the Steam Deck is so much cheaper when compared to the other, more high-end models. It's still a very popular choice for some, however, as I mentioned earlier, and that is because you can, really simply and cheaply upgrade the storage. Putting that tangent behind us, however, the mid-tier LCD Steam Decks boast a much bigger and better 256GB SSD. Not the fastest SSD in the world, mind you, but more than enough to get the job done on whatever you're playing. The best LCD model, which is the one I have here, features a very decently sized 512GB SSD, which is definitely the option most people went with, as like myself, I bet we all thought that with how big games can be nowadays, this would be the most beneficial option. The regular ROG Ally matches the best LCD deck with a 512GB SSD as standard. There are no other models with more or less storage, and so for the most part, what you see is what you get. The OLED Steam Deck models have much higher stock sizes, however, which definitely come with a sizable price hike as well. The entry-level OLED deck starts at 512GB, matching the best variant of the LCD, with the best model coming in at a very pricey and very nice 1TB SSD. Definitely worth going for that if you're looking for big amounts of fast storage and if you have no clue where to start on upgrading. The ROG Ally X matches the best OLED model this time, coming in at 1TB. This is definitely a better 1TB though. You may be thinking, how is this 1TB better than that 1TB? And that is a very good question that will be answered very shortly. And by very shortly, I mean right now. The ROG Ally X, by some black magic fuckery from Asus, actually features a full-size 2280 SSD. That's right. No more scrounging around looking for shitty 2230 SSDs that cost more. You can just buy a cheaper 2280 SSD and slap that bad boy in there. The only downside to this is that it only has one screw mounting hole for the 2280 sized SSDs, and so you can't retrofit your 2230 SSDs that you were using in a device like this or the regular Ally if you plan on upgrading. I found this out the hard way, and yeah, it still traumatizes me to this day. You know what, let me actually tell you the harrowing story of how I found this out. Again, I feel like instead of just going the nuclear option and taking it all apart, I could have just googled if they were compatible and saved myself the hassle, but in my infinite galaxy brain wisdom, I did not do this. This all actually happened in the same evening I got the Ally X, and so I just wanted to be busy and done so, I could, install some games, but it unfortunately did not pan out that way. So this was before I sent back the original Ally, of course, and so I'd still not taken out the 1TB SSD that I had in this out of it. So I was sat there thinking that I could just transport the 1TB SSD from the original Ally and implant it into the Ally X so I could just boot up into Baza and start playing. So after half a fucking hour of getting the back of this device off, yes, it took that long. I have no clue why, but with, one of the screws, it just wouldn't come out, and it took absolutely ages. After all of that, however, I finally removed the SSD and placed in my 2230. To my surprise, there's no mount for the 2230, so I just kind of look at my desk where the surgery is taking place with a face of pure apathy and disappointment, a bit like that one image of David Martinez from Cyberpunk Edge Runners. Realising that I've just wasted 30 minutes, I promptly reattach the back of my Ally X, which of course takes about 30 seconds, and get to work on my Steam Deck and the little SSD caddy that I showed in my last video. If you're wondering as to why I'm taking the Steam Deck apart, it's because I already had the original Steam Deck SSD in the caddy, and so I used the upgraded one in the Ally, which meant putting the original Ally SSD in the Steam Deck. I take apart the Steam Deck and extract the drive, which I set to one side. I then think I might as well put the original Steam Deck SSD back in the Steam Deck and just use the 1TB SSD in the caddy, as the deck was broken and I wasn't planning on using it anytime soon. I do this and then put the original deck SSD back in the Steam Deck and the original Ally SSD back into the Ally. I put both of the devices back together and then started to pack everything away when something occurred to me. I let out a massive sigh and then sat at my desk with the David Martinez apathy face once more, with the realisation that I hadn't actually transferred all of the data off of the deck SSD back onto my PC. So here I am, putting everything back on the desk to take apart the Steam Deck once again, and then removing the drive. I go to take the 1TB SSD out of the caddy to realise that the copper shield I put on it is actually getting caught on the caddy, so I couldn't remove it. Genuinely about 20 minutes later, I finally pry the bastard open without breaking anything, and then swap the SSDs over. Over an hour of file transferring later, I finally take the deck SSD out of the caddy and reinstall it into the deck before putting it all back together. After that, I just put everything away and everything was fine. But was it, you may be wondering? Where did you put the 1TB SSD? You can't put it back in the caddy just for it to get stuck again, so where did you put it? At which point, I am really pulling the David Martinez face right now, you know? And, you know, I have to get everything back out again, take the Steam Deck apart again, change the SSDs over, and decided to just keep the 1TB SSD in this. And, you know, like another hour and a half of transferring the files back to the original SSD, just transferred them off onto, you know, whatever. I'm a bit delirious at this point, but, you know, everything is finally in its right place at this point. I started that whole process at about 10 PM that night and finished this whole process at about 3 to 3:30 AM. And that doesn't even include the whole Bazzite installation process, which I couldn't do until everything had transferred because for whatever reason, my PC slowed to an absolute crawl. And so by the time Bazzite was installed on the Ally X and I had all of my games lined up for download, it was about 5 AM, which you can imagine isn't the greatest thing ever. That was quite possibly one of the most stressful evenings of my adult life, and the fact that it was all due to my stupidity and inability to remember things or search for things made it all the worse. Still, in the end, it made for a decent story and a crappy YouTube video, so I hope you enjoy my misery. Anyway, where the fuck even were we? I can't even remember. Ah, yeah, specs. Let's finish these off before I, have another meltdown. The LCD Steam Deck lags behind all the others here in this regard, only featuring a Wi-Fi 5 card inside of it, which to the LCD model's credit, still isn't too bad. You can still get more than enough power from it should you change the right settings. It's annoying to do, but makes you feel so much better and improves things a lot by doing so, at least in my experience. Actually, before we continue, let me quickly go over a couple of things you can do to help improve the connection speed and stability if you have an LCD model. It won't take long, I promise. What you're going to want to do if you've booted up your Steam Deck, I have to find that it's in the center of the frame, so yep, you just want to press the Steam button, go to Settings, go to System. Is it System? Yep, it's System Settings, Enable Developer Mode. From here, all you're going to want to go down and do is go to Developer and then turn off Enable Wi-Fi Power Management. Just turn that off and it should be a lot more consistent when it boots back up. You can also limit the download speed to, I don't know, if you say have like 250 Mbps, limit it to 100 Mbps because it should be a bit more stable, I have found that in my experience anyway. I limit it to 100 and it tends to get that now instead of the sort of 5 to 10 it was sat on before. It's basically as easy as that. As I say, I was stuck on about 5 to 10 Mbps that just kept dropping out, and after changing these settings, it now sits between 80 and 100 all the time without ever dropping out. It's not the most consistent thing in the world, but it sure definitely beats out what it was before by a long, long margin, and so I say it's a worthwhile change. You won't really need to bother doing these on the OLED models or the Ally and the Ally X, however, these models boast a really nice Wi-Fi 6E chip, which allows for much better connectivity and consistent speeds. At least they do in my experience. This can definitely differ with the amount of devices connected to that, internet, like how far away you are from the router, the speed and type of internet you have, as well as other variables, so don't just take this all without a pinch of salt. It's just how it works for me. It may be better for you, it may be worse, it's unique for everyone. You may be thinking that with more and more things now including Wi-Fi 7, especially in the UK, Wi-Fi 6E might not be up to it anymore, and you couldn't even be more wrong, you know? I still only have Wi-Fi 6 in this house, and so everything works fantastic. We'll probably be like this for a few more years, and so will mostly everybody else. Wi-Fi 7 isn't nearly as set in the infrastructure we have right now as broadband providers and whatnot want you to believe. Wi-Fi 6E will suit you just fine for a few years, and probably even longer. The battery is also a huge selling point for these devices. They are advertised as handhelds after all, and so obviously they don't require constant wall power in order to run. This means that the better the batteries that run these things, then depending on your use case, the better the time you're going to have. Starting out at the lowest capacity devices, the original ROG Ally and the LCD Steam Deck models both include a semi-decent 40 watt-hour battery. While this is serviceable on the Steam Deck, however, considering the fact that it is a lower power machine with a max of 15 watts and a minimum of 3 watts on the APU, the ROG Ally really lacks in this area, with a max TDP being of around 25 to 30 watts, I think it's 25, with a minimum of 7 on the Z1 Extreme. This means that even though the battery on both models is basically identical when it comes to capacity, the Ally will not last nearly as long as the Steam Deck, especially considering that it's powering that humongous and power-hungry Z1 Extreme with a 1080p 120Hz display. As I mentioned earlier, you can just do what I do and limit the display to 60, but even then you're still limited with what you can change with the TDP limit, with the lowest being 7 watts. The battery is still going to drain faster than any deck variant in most scenarios, so if you're looking for longer playtime overall, a Steam Deck may be more beneficial to you. It may even be more beneficial for you should you decide to get an OLED model. The OLED has been upgraded from the original 40 watt-hour to a slightly bigger and better 50 watt-hour. Now this definitely makes a noticeable increase, and you will see the difference in your play sessions. While it is a noticeable increase, however, it's not the hugest, and so you'll probably still need to invest in a battery pack or something for longer journeys away from the wall power. You may also notice that the difference is less noticeable when playing something more intensive that requires more watts to efficiently play. Lower intensive games, in which you can lower the TDP to 5 or 6, will be where you see the most increase in playtime overall. So again, if indie titles or older games are where you're at, then an OLED might be a better option for you if you want to splash a bit more money. A regular LCD will do just fine, however, so keep that in mind. Now, the best of the bunch is, by no surprise, the ROG Ally X. The Ally X has a huge increase in battery life over all other devices mentioned within this video, coming in at a whopping 80 watt hours. That is double, yes you heard me right, double what the LCD deck and the regular Ally provide, which is just incredible, especially for the use case I have for this device. I will go over my personal experience with the battery life shortly, but for now, let me briefly talk about the differences in battery life between these devices. After doing a bit of research, the general consensus is that we predicted, with everything at max, the ROG Ally more often than not had the worst battery out of the bunch, with the average of about 60 to 70 minutes, which really isn't great. Turning the TDP down to performance mode over turbo mode on the Ally proved a little more helpful, with around 90 to 100 minutes on average, which is definitely better, but not by much. The Steam Deck LCD provided a slightly better average, with an experience of 100 to 120 minutes depending on the game. In some rare cases, I did actually see the regular Ally edge out over the Steam Deck in performance mode. This wasn't regular enough for me to say that it had any major advantage over the Steam Deck battery life in general though. The OLED Steam Deck actually edges out on both of them, providing an average battery life of about 140 to 160 minutes. This is definitely a much bigger improvement over both, but I wouldn't quite qualify this as a worthwhile reason to upgrade from an LCD. Just get a battery pack. As I say though, these are all game and setting dependent, so your mileage may vary. Don't come at me because your Steam Deck wouldn't last 2 hours when playing Cyberpunk at max graphics. The ROG Ally X smashes all 3 models out of the water. At turbo mode, which is 25 watts for both the Ally and the Ally X lasts on average just over 130 minutes, which is actually incredible. The 25 watt performance for over 2 hours of battery life is really good stuff, and definitely a noticeable improvement over the regular Ally's 60 to 70 minute. In performance mode, however, which is actually 15 watts for the regular Ally and 17 watts for the Ally X, the battery on average lasts a really good 160 to 180 minutes. This beats out everything on the list in averages, but as I say, look at what games you want to play, then look at some battery benchmarks on the devices you're looking at. These are not definitive stats that will work the same every which way. You may be thinking that the Ally X doesn't really edge out that much over the Steam Deck OLED, so why does this 80 watt hour device only last slightly longer than a 50 watt hour one? Now, I know for a fact that nobody watching this video asked that question because I explained it earlier, but I'm going to answer it again anyway. You have to remember that the Steam Deck OLED has a far less powerful APU inside of it, only allowing a maximum of 15 watts at any given time. The fact that the Ally X can run games at a slightly higher wattage, combined with the higher resolution and frame rate, and the battery life starts to make sense. If you don't run everything at max settings, which, let's be honest, most people won't, you'll start to notice that even if you do the same with the OLED Steam Deck, the Ally X will edge out more and more the lower the settings go. While I don't have an OLED, I do have some real-world experience with the battery life on both the Ally X and the LCD deck that I would like to share with you, as I found it absolutely incredible. When I initially got this device, that weekend I went over to my aunt's house. I stayed there for about 3.5 hours, and so I wasn't there for ages. But, you know, it was enough time for me to give this thing a proper sort of test. Now, I took the Ally X, as I said, and thought that I would properly test the battery to see how well it ran. So the game I chose to play was Mad Max, and I was a little bit of, the way through my new playthrough and just decided to see how far it could go. As I mentioned in my last video, with SteamOS, you can actually inject FSR into any game you're playing as long as you lower the in-game resolution from the base display resolution. FSR on SteamOS will then proceed to upscale the game to the native display resolution, which, as stated before, never looks as good as the native display resolution, but looks a damn sight better than it would by just flat out lowering the resolution. Bazzite is no different. With it being a clone of SteamOS, you guessed it, FSR is also present within the quick access menu, and so I just decided to use it to my advantage. I lowered Mad Max to 720p within the game settings and then used SteamOS FSR to upscale it to 1080p. I was actually running it in a lower resolution that the Steam Deck can output and had it upscaling to a resolution that the Steam Deck couldn't. Even though it was upscaled, the 7-inch display made it look fantastic, and so I just decided from then on to run all of my games like that. I also decided, as mentioned earlier, to just run the screen at 60Hz instead of 120, as I prefer the stability of 60 instead of the higher inconsistent frame rate that upping the screen refresh rate would give me. It allowed me to lower the TDP limit a lot more and save tons and tons of battery life. I went into her house with about 98% battery left on the device and was constantly playing for about 3 hours. This was at about 15 watts of power, I want to say, so I can't really remember the exact amount, but I know it was lower than the initial performance mode that this device is by default. I left that house with 33% battery remaining. 3 hours of playtime. 3 hours and it still had a third of the battery left? That's absolutely incredible battery life. I could have easily gotten 4.5 to 5 hours of battery life at those settings. I think coming from the Steam Deck really allowed me to get used to 60Hz at a lower TDP, and so I just took that idea and ran with it. It seriously paid off, and even still thinking that I could have gotten that much on a fairly modern game is astonishing to me. Having an almost 1080p experience that looked better, performed better, and lasted longer than the Steam Deck did, at its best was just mind-blowing to me. You know what, before we continue any further on some other bits, let me just tell you about how fucking stupid I am when it comes to the Ally and the Ally X. So, yeah. You remember how earlier in this video I said that I set the other one up for return as it was broken? Yeah, well here's the fun part. It wasn't. After a couple of days of having the Ally X, I was playing Mad Max just as I did with the regular Ally, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Max just punched, just as he did in the regular Ally. At this point, I knew for a fact that something was wrong, as I now had 2 devices in which the exact same issue occurred in the exact same circumstances. Luckily, my mind didn't actually go the nuclear option this time and acted more rational. I knew that I must be at fault here, and then it hit me. For those of you that know, you'll know what button on a mouse is set for Max to punch in the game. For those of you that don't know, let me tell you. It's left click. Now, if you own any of these devices, then you know that most, if not all of them, feature a touchscreen interface so you can navigate certain things easier. This also applies to any program you run on them, including games. What was actually happening was my finger was slightly making contact with the screen when using the right analog stick. This obviously tells the device that a left-click input has been recognised and in this instance, caused Max to punch. Luckily, I hadn't actually sent the original Ally back yet, and so when I finally got around to processing the return, I marked it as me just not enjoying the device. This way, I hoped it wouldn't be marked as faulty or whatever, and someone can still get a lot of enjoyment out of it should they decide to resell it. While I am incredibly stupid for not realising this sooner, I actually cut myself some slack on this, as it made me realise just how great the Steam Deck ergonomics are. With the way the device is laid out, the sticks sit so perfectly so you can move them more than enough with your entire thumb stretched out. This is incredibly comfortable, and so coming from a Steam Deck, I sort of tried to apply this style. Quite poorly, mind you. The Ally obviously has a very different stick layout. The left stick isn't so bad as its position can easily allow me to emulate that sort of style of hold, but for the right stick however, I found that holding the full weight of this device made bending my thumb long term incredibly uncomfortable, and so I would just stretch it out and use the bottom of my thumb to use the stick instead. This works great, apart from when you accidentally touch the screen so lightly that you don't even realise that you've done it. It's an annoyance that I'm still dealing with to this very day, and I doubt that it's going to stop anytime soon. Yeah, I told you that I'm a fucking idiot, and while you definitely all believed me, I bet even that one caught you off guard. As you can see though, I did decide to keep the Ally X, and it is the better device overall. Considering that there was only one of these left, and I got there to pick it up about 10 minutes before the store closed, it told me that this was a sign that I should just keep this instead. Flimsy reason I know, but it allows me to sleep at night. Speaking of ergonomics though, I briefly want to go over the differences in feel between these devices and how the Ally X improves over its older brother. The Ally X improves in pretty much all aspects over the regular Ally and how it feels and performs. The Ally X feels so much better in the hands, it is unreal. Not as great as the Steam Deck, mind you, but leagues above the original Ally. Because I don't own the original Ally anymore, we will unfortunately have to compare the two devices using a real Ally X that I have here, and some images that I shamelessly stole from Google. The main difference people will instantly notice is the colour of the device. The ROG Ally goes with this really sleek looking white design. It contrasts things like the buttons and the triggers really well, not to mention the bezel on the display. It genuinely looks like a really premium device, more so than the Ally X in my opinion. The RGB lights surrounding the analog sticks look really nice as well as an added bonus. But me being the stickler for distractions I am, actually have these turned off more often than not, as it'll save a little bit more battery life, and, you know, they won't distract me as much when playing in a darker room or area. Doesn't mean they don't look damn nice though, because they certainly do. I do think the black design on the Ally X actually does make the RGB on their sticks shine a bit more, so, you know, if that's your thing, maybe give this a second look. You know, yeah, as if anyone's going to buy a device purely for the RGB analog sticks. If you're one of those people, sort your life out. The second thing people may notice is the shape of the device when looking at it head on. It's actually slightly different than the regular Ally, and no, you wouldn't be crazy for thinking this. If you did think it, you would actually be right. The Ally X has slightly more rounded curves in the bottom left and bottom right of the device. Definitely the right move made by them in my opinion. While the original Ally felt decent in the hand, because of how you might have to contort your hands to use a device like this, especially with its stick layout, the edges that were present on the bottom sides of the original Ally tended to just jut into your hands after a while, which could make things incredibly uncomfortable. And for someone like myself, who was coming from the perfectly designed Steam Deck, this was certainly one of the worst things about the original that I'm glad was at least improved on the Ally X. It still isn't perfect on the Ally X, however, and can still be uncomfortable when held for extended periods of time, but we will touch upon that when I fully go over the differences between these two. The Ally X is definitely a bit thicker than the original Ally in order to compensate for the new cooling system they have implemented. It isn't too noticeable at all, and I only really noticed it whenever I was directly comparing the two devices in my hands, and so it isn't really that big of a deal. It still sits fine in the hand, and the only downside to this is that my Ally X no longer fits in my Steam Deck dock. The regular Ally was just about able to squeeze itself into the dock and not move, but this is slightly too big and so just does not fit. This isn't a huge issue, however, as I can simply just connect a USB extension cable to the dock and fit it to the Ally X while it sits in the included card holder, but, you know, it's still inconvenient. Some of the big changes to the device over its older brother can be seen on the top of the device, specifically the I/O. As you can see with the regular Ally, this has a decent amount of things going on up here. The first thing that may catch your eye is the huge ROG XG port next to the Type-C port, which is basically a proprietary port for Asus's eGPUs. This means that if you're one of the unfortunate few that own one of these proprietary eGPUs, then you can happily connect it to your ROG Ally and get that extra performance that a proper GPU will come with. I don't even know why I bother calling those of you that own these unfortunate. They aren't even that bad, they're just expensive. Stupidly so, some might say. Regardless, as I said, this comes next to your USB-C port, which is a standard 100-watt USB-C charging port, as well as your headphone jack, power button with a fingerprint reader, and your SD card port. You may notice that on the Ally X, the SD card port has been moved over to the right side of the device, and that is because of a fairly common issue that affected the regular Ally. Essentially, when the device came under high load, the internals around that part of the device would get extremely hot, causing the SD card to also get incredibly hot, which in turn caused it to stop functioning. This was obviously a huge issue, and I believe that there were reports of SD cards being fully bricked by this problem. Just imagine playing a game which is stored on your SD card, then this problem starts to flare up. I imagine it wouldn't be the greatest thing in the world to deal with. Luckily, in the 24 hours I used my original Ally, I didn't have this issue, and so I can't really put in any first-hand experience there. This issue has been resolved on the Ally X, however, and I believe that there aren't as many temperature-sensitive components on that specific part of the board, and so the SD card slot is, it's going to work as well as the cards you put in there. You'll enjoy a nice cool temperature, allowing you to do whatever you'd like without any issue. You may also notice that the ROG XG port that was featured on the original Ally has in fact been removed, instead replacing it with a regular old USB 4 Thunderbolt port. This means that you can plug any GPU enclosure into this, allowing for a more wider range of GPUs to use in conjunction with this device. Pretty neat addition if I do say so myself, but you do still have to pay an arm and a leg to get the privilege to do this, so, overall, unless this is your primary gaming device, it more than likely isn't worth your money. You can still do a lot with this port, however. Because it is a regular Type-C port, you can plug in whatever the hell you want, and it is bound to work. You can even charge from this port as well as the other one, so if one day you fancy changing from the left port, then you can easily fulfill your dreams and do so without consequence. This is also extremely useful if you want to charge your device and have an external storage source, for instance. I use this tactic fairly regularly when I'm setting up and changing over the games I have on emulators and whatnot, so having that extra port there is extremely helpful. Other than that, there isn't really a huge amount of other differences on this device over the original. The triggers are slightly more extended outwards, the face buttons stick out a bit more, and the analog sticks are a bit stiffer, but, other than that, that's basically it for the differences for the ROG Ally and the Ally X. Now to get onto the differences between this and the Steam Deck. From a first glance, they obviously both resemble handheld PCs, and so there's that. But if you decide to look from an angle more clear than your peripheral vision, then you'll notice there's several big changes right off the bat. The Steam Deck, personally, is a lot more pleasing to the eye, mainly because it's a far more symmetrical device over the Ally X with its identical analog stick and touchpad layout. The Ally X obviously goes the Xbox route with its offset analog stick layout, which personally isn't all too great for a device like this. It's fine for a controller, which is a lot lighter and doesn't require you to be looking directly at it in order to use it, but for something like this, I find that there is a lot more strain on my right thumb after a while. The edges of each device look fairly similar, with them starting to dip in the further out they go, allowing for the inner part of your hand to sit easier. These devices themselves share a very similar sort of shape on the front. I have even mistaken them to be the other device on more than one occasion at first glance, although that could be more of a me problem. After all, I am a certified moron. The white lettering on the buttons on the Steam Deck are a lot easier to see in lower light environments over the more subdued colours that the Ally X exhibits. This is definitely more of an observation on my part though, as 99% of people already know where the buttons are going to be while not looking at them. The analog sticks on the Steam Deck are obviously a different colour from the shell itself as well. This makes for a very, very nice contrast in my opinion. Moving to the back of the devices is where we start to see a lot of differences. The difference that may catch your eye first and foremost is the ventilation. The Steam Deck has a lot less intake ventilation on the back, with just this measly little grate here. It serves its purpose though, as this device easily remains in the serviceable temperature range at most times. Your hands don't get in the way of it either, and so the cooling efficiency is barely altered through long sessions of gameplay. Other than that though, it's nothing overly special, and the device does still get extremely hot under load. The Ally X, however, boasts a much larger rear grate, with the ventilation holes going over a majority of the top half of the device. While the ventilation on the left side seems to be lacking when compared to the right side of the device, it is more than serviceable and easily provides enough of an opening for air to get into the system. The left side ventilation also resembles the ROG logo, just in case you have super mega Alzheimer's and forget what device you're using while you're using it. The next big thing you may notice is this reflective strip down the back of the Ally X. It serves no purpose whatsoever other than reminding you that this is in fact a Republic of Gamers device. Again, just in case you forget what device you're using while you're using it. The last major difference you will see are the back buttons on either device. The Steam Deck comes in with a very nice set of 4 back buttons, with 2 featured on either side. Both your middle finger and your ring fingers sit nice and easy on each of these buttons while holding the device, allowing for very, very easy and low effort presses onto them. The buttons aren't too soft or big that you'll accidentally be pressing them all the time, however, so while you're almost always resting your fingers there, you can still throw the device around a little bit during play and not press them accidentally. The Ally X, on the other hand, takes a slightly different approach with 2 back buttons instead of the Steam Deck's 4. With the way you end up holding this device, your middle fingers will be the way you utilize these buttons. Some people may be able to use their ring finger if they prefer, but for many people out there, and for me personally, the middle finger is definitely the go-to. As I mentioned earlier, the buttons on the back of the Ally X have been made a lot smaller than the original Ally. The back buttons on the original Ally, while serviceable, would get pressed down a lot more on accident, just because they were so huge and you had to rest your hands on them. Because of the different ergonomics over the Ally over the Steam Deck, you would end up just leaning on them and pressing them with no intention of doing so. While it's not perfect on the Ally X, you can see that a clear and concerted effort was made to try and reduce this from happening. It was one of the major things I really didn't like about the original Ally, and I only used that device for a day, so that tells you how much of a pain in the arse it was. The bottoms of both devices don't really have anything special. The Steam Deck has the SD card port, but that's about it. The Ally X just has some general information about your device, which I've lovingly covered up here as a precaution, because I know how devious some folk out there are, and I don't want some clearly very funny man to take my serial number, go to Asus, and say that this device has tons of illegal. Can I say that on YouTube? Yeah, I don't think I can. I'd probably cut that. On top of the devices are a little more interesting, with both devices having your standard connectors, buttons and ports, etc. The most interesting thing would easily be the exhaust ventilation on both devices, however. The Steam Deck only requires this one exhaust at the top, that some people see as a weird hookah pipe and regularly sniff. I don't know why, I've never done this, I don't really care for it, but, you know, maybe I've been missing out. I'm not going to try it, but, you know. The Ally X has a slightly more substantial exhaust system, opting for not one, not two, but three exhausts. You have these two major exhausts on the back, above where the rear intakes would sit, and then this one smaller exhaust sat on the top. This obviously makes for an incredibly space-effective and efficient cooling system that, in my experience, really does work. You can really feel the air get pushed out of these bad boys, so whatever improvements they did to the Ally X over the original Ally when it comes to cooling really shine through here. You'll also notice that because of this beefy cooling system that is present in the Ally X, that it is in fact a lot wider than the Steam Deck. It's not a huge difference, and it is still extremely easy to use. It's just a lot more noticeable than it is when compared to the regular Ally though. These devices actually weigh extremely similar amounts, with the ROG Ally X weighing in at a slightly heavier 1.49 pounds, or roughly 675 grams, with the Steam Deck coming in at just under at 1.48 pounds, or roughly 671 grams. The difference in weight is barely noticeable, but with the worse ergonomics that are present in this, the Ally X does feel a lot heavier than the Steam Deck overall. It's still very easy to hold, however, and so this shouldn't really be a huge factor in deciding which device to get, unless you suffer from polio. The Steam Deck is noticeably bigger than the Ally X as well. Not by loads, mind you, but it's definitely bigger at a glance, and I definitely think that that is a little better in my opinion. The bigger size allows for your hand to take up more of the surface area on the sides of the device instead of cramping them slightly to keep the screen clear. For those of you looking for a true size comparison, here's a Glock 18... No, I'm joking, alright? We already did that one. Here's an M14 instead. There's not really much I can say about this. The only thing that I can really say is that I'm running out of blue airsoft guns. Now, for a proper dive into ergonomics. I know, loads of you are now commenting,
well, you've already talked about how good the ergonomics are on the Steam Deck, you know, but why are you talking about it again?
And yes, you are correct. What I haven't talked about, however, is how good they are when compared to the Ally X in particular, so I'm giving myself a pass here. I have always shielded the Steam Deck for its ergonomics, and I will continue to do so, but hear me out. If you've watched my previous Steam Deck video, then you may know where this is headed, but we're going to do this little exercise again anyway. Just take your hands and relax them in front of you. Hey, you got to do it too. Yes, Tom, I see. I can see that you're not doing it. You know, do it. I really hope there's just one Tom watching this who wasn't doing it and got the biggest fright, you know. I'm sorry, Tom, if you're watching. I didn't know. I didn't know, I swear. I did know. I did know, alright? I did. Once you've got your nice and relaxed hands, just place them in a position that you would usually hold a controller. It feels nice and natural to place your hand in this position, right? This is how your hand is meant to be. It's a nice and relaxed posture for them. If you have a Steam Deck, then you can try this next bit. Just take your Steam Deck and apply the same hand position around one or both sides of it. It just sits lovely in your hand, doesn't it? It's absolutely beautiful how the ergonomics are designed on this device. Now, it's fairly similar with the Ally and the Ally X, but as you can see with the Deck and the Ally together here, the Ally X is a lot flatter overall when it comes to like the actual hand grips. There is a huge difference when compared to how angular the Steam Deck is. The problem with everything bar the Steam Deck in my experience anyway is how they sit in your hand. The ergonomics are fine, but I don't feel like I have as good a grip on this as I do when I hold the Steam Deck. The Deck's ergonomics allow for a much more deliberate grab when holding this device, and it just allows it to securely sit in your hand a lot easier. The Ally X, as well as other devices from what I have seen, tend to put a lot of strain on your fingers as they have to bend slightly in order to compensate for the lack of depth that the back displays. It's a fairly common complaint that I have amongst the other devices, and it really annoys me after a little while. This is why I will always shield the Steam Deck for not just having the absolute best ergonomics here, but the best ergonomics in the entire controller industry in my opinion. And I will not be told otherwise. It's just so perfect to hold. Maybe it's just my hands or whatever, but this just seems to be made for them. So, after taking a general look at the devices, we can see that for someone who isn't looking for any major differences, they won't really find loads. But for someone that has used either device for an extended period of time like myself, they will notice the smaller things. And I think that's something that is what makes devices like these rather beautiful in a way. We aren't done yet, however. Oh, no. We still have something else to look at. Those of you who watched my previous video might know where this is going, but let me tell you right now through the form of poorly conducted charades. That's right, baby. We're opening these bad boys up. Now, I know I said earlier that the Ally X was an absolute bastard to get into, and while that is true, I'm gonna do it anyway. So please be grateful for the level of pain I'm about to endure and put myself through for this video. Regardless, let's get on with it. So glad I bought this electric screwdriver for this, man. Using the manual one last time was not fun. Oh, fucking hell, Aiden. Jesus Christ. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, no, the analog sticks come out. Oh, fuck, that's not good. That's bad. That's actually... Oh, God, that's really bad. Oh, the screws... Oh, God, I might have actually just snapped that off. Oh, oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Oh, God. Oh, dear. Oh, it's bad. Hold on. Oh, no. Oh, Jesus Christ, Aiden. Brief intermission to fucking fix this thing because I've broken it. Oh, God. Oh, that's stuck. Oh, that's really stuck. Oh, fucking hell. You know, this is the second time I'm having to film this because the first time the audio fucked up. I did not expect to break the fucking trigger. The whole trigger assembly is fucking broken. I'm having to super glue it, but I don't even know if you can see that. I can't even see on the fucking thing. Thanks, protective cover. Yeah, there it is. I'm having to glue it together. Oh God, I've had to glue like the standoff in there. Well, here's hoping this don't break. Oh God. Oh, oh dear. Okay. Now that we've got the backs off of both devices, and you can see how vastly different they are, you can also see that the analog stick is still missing because it's still broken. Has the glue dried yet? I have no idea. Look at that. That's what we have to deal with now. This is now more broken than this was. God fucking damn it. Please be appreciative of this. Please like and subscribe if you like this. I've just broken my Ally X for this. Regardless, you can see how vastly different they are in their internal layout. You know, you may notice that I've had to keep the rear shell of the Ally X close to it, as there is in fact a long-ass ribbon cable going to each of the rear buttons. So, you know, they didn't do what Valve did and just put the buttons on the back of like a plastic board that you can just press in. But instead have their own little dedicated boards for each individual button. So I applaud Asus for this, as it shows the amount of effort they really put into this device. Also, fuck you, Asus. It is extremely annoying getting this to sit properly. Right away though, you can see the Ally X's fat cooling system with a copper pipe leading to this little APU under here. This is obviously a lot more than the Steam Deck when it comes to cooling, as the deck only has this one little fan right here that cools the APU. It's kind of amazing that Asus managed to fit this pretty large and convoluted system in a device that fits in your hand, so props to them for that. At a first glance as well, there's more going on under the hood of the Steam Deck, and you may be able to tell the reason right away. This reason is because of this fat-ass battery that takes up at least like almost 50% of our viewable internals on the ROG Ally X. It is worth it though, considering how useful that fat 80 watt-hour battery is, and so in a device like this, that's fair enough. So it gets the Gception seal of approval. The Steam Deck has a lot more going on in here that we can see, as the battery only takes up this much smaller segment here. Imagine only being a 40 watt-hour battery. Very sad indeed. If you remember my previous video on the subject, I said that Valve did a very good job on this device and its modular internals. The fact that everything is accessible with only a few screws, and you can remove almost every single part of this device and replace specific parts instead of the whole thing itself. It's absolutely incredible, and I think it is a very underappreciated aspect of the Steam Deck. The ROG Ally, while not as nearly as modular at first glance, is definitely taking steps in the right direction in order to try and compete with this level of internal modularity. Some specific parts can come right off, as you can see with the trigger there, you know, on the same side. There's just 2 screws under there keeping the trigger assembly in place. The analog sticks here as well also seem to just have a few screws that you can remove along with 1 ribbon cable, and then you can pop those right back out and replace them. A bit like the Steam Deck, where the SSD is present under this metal plate that I'm not going to take off because I lost some of the screws the last time I did this. The SSD sits right here with no metal plate. Just, you know, it's just right there for you to get. It's very, very easy to tinker with this device with the things you're going to need to tinker with if you decide to upgrade. You know, this isn't even the first time I've taken this device apart for the trigger. The trigger was actually really creaky a little while ago. Now I think I've figured out why, because it's fucked. But yeah, I had to take this out and spray some WD-40 on it a little while ago, and so yeah, this is not the first time this has left the device, but at this rate it might be the last. I did just manage to screw it back in when I did that then, and it worked fine, so you know, that's fine. While I don't think it'll be as easy to access things like this, you know, with this battery in the way, considering, you know, the ribbon cable, well, actually, no, it should be fine upon further inspection, but, like, getting to that ribbon cable might be a bit more annoying. You know, with this, I feel like it's a lot easier, because obviously it's the exact same on both sides, so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Obviously, like I say, this is a full-size 2280 NVMe SSD, so this is absolutely amazing that they were able to fit one of, like, the regular size in here, you know? I don't know why they bothered doing this. I mean, it's a very, very good upgrade, and I'm glad they did, but I don't know why they thought this was one of the more necessary upgrades to do. But it does go to show that they are putting a lot of time and effort into their R&D in order to get this to work, so props to Asus once again. It shows that they're really indeed looking out for the consumer, and, you know, this is exactly what I want for a device like this that I'm going to be paying off for the next 3 or so years of my life. I was going to do a bit of a deeper dive into these devices, but I'm now not going to, after taking the back off has caused one of the major internals, or one of the major aspects of this device to stop functioning and break, so, you know, I'm not going to do that anymore, because I don't really want to break anything more. You guys know I'm a fucking idiot, as clearly shown. So I'm bound to do something bad if I go further. Still, you know, you can see a hell of a lot in here, and even with this fat-ass battery in the way, I hope this provides enough of a look into both devices. This shouldn't really be the main factor when looking for things that sway your decision on what to buy if you're in the market, just a comparison. Oh god, it doesn't, it's resisting. Oh god, oh god, oh dear. What are you going on? Okay, that was relatively stress-free. Now for this side. Ooh, okay, that, you know what? That one was pretty crunchy, but yeah. The right trigger does feel noticeably stiffer now. But that's fine, right? I'll get used to that. Ooh. Ooh. You know what? This is definitely the more durable out of the two. Are these the world's most crunchiest devices? Let's find out. Now, you probably want my opinion on what you should buy if you're in the market. You could easily boil this down to the simple answer of the Steam Deck being less powerful, so get the more powerful device. And yes, you could just do that, but like those few people who commented on my previous video on this, it ain't all about the hardware at all. Not even close. A lot of the time, it's usually software or even external factors like repairability. Clearly important for me. The true horsepower of a device, while important, is never the only reason why someone might invest in a device like this. While I absolutely love my Ally X, and it is my primary handheld PC for gaming, I still use my Steam Deck every single day. Not always for gaming, mind you, but more as a media center. I like to have YouTube on while I sleep. It helps me drift off a lot easier than just raw dogging the silence, and so I need to hook up a device to one of my monitors. And I used to use my Z Fold 5 with Samsung DeX, but unfortunately I had to sell that for reasons we'll touch upon later. I then used my Samsung S23 Ultra for the same reason. I now use that as my primary phone, so I have to have it in close proximity to myself at night. I was searching for a device to use, and the Steam Deck just fit perfectly. I can connect it via its own dock to my monitor. Just hook up some cables for a keyboard and mouse so I can switch them over to the dock once I finish using my PC for the day, and then set everything up ready for the night. It's a fantastic little device that, while built for games, definitely works for more. in like a different situation, you know, than like a Switch or a Vita will. You know, it's such a versatile little device. Now, before we go further into this, I want to give some first-hand experience on both devices being used in their element. This requires a bit of small context, but it'll make sense eventually, so stick with me. It sort of leads into it. This is actually the second time I am doing, well, technically the third time I'm doing this video. So I've already filmed, recorded, you know, like edited, and even uploaded. It's currently privated on my channel, like the first draft of this that I did sort of late October time, about 2-3 weeks after I got this. And upon further inspection after watching my original Steam Deck video back, I wasn't really happy with it, and so I'm doing it again, and this is the second time I'm recording this because the audio fucked up the first time. I, however, am glad I came to that realization when I did, because a day or so after all of that happened and I came to that realization, my PC actually just died. I was in the process of cleaning it, and upon reassembling it for use, it just wouldn't boot up, no matter what I did. So at that point, I was just simply without a PC. The only way I could experience proper gaming was through my handhelds. Because I had to obviously fund parts for this PC, I had to basically factory reset my PS5 gaming laptop and a load of other devices like my Z Fold 5 and put them up for sale on local marketplaces. I also gutted the computer and took out the parts I was certain worked, and then sold off the rest as untested. I had only my Steam Deck and my ROG Ally X for games, and I did have a regular laptop my mum sold me a few weeks prior, before she upgraded, that I could use for YouTube and whatnot, so games were really the only thing I needed to cover. As I've said before, I use games as a regulating tactic. They are what I use to keep myself calm and collected throughout the spare time I have, and it allows me to take myself out of situations I find myself in the real world and just escape for a little while. Having no PC was going to be incredibly hard for me because of this reason, and so I had to think of alternatives. My handhelds were going to absolutely come in clutch here, but I was cut off from some of my more intensive titles that I was midway through, or, you know, even the PC VR section. You know, I couldn't do that anymore. Sim racing was also a no-go, as Linux has a notoriously hard time connecting different wheel peripherals, especially in my experience. I had games, but you know what it's like when you have access to something and then it gets taken away from you. You really want it back, even if you weren't fussed about it when you had access to it. You take it for granted. The first few days weren't actually that bad. I'd recently purchased Yakuza 0 and was planning on giving that series a run through as I had not done so before. Yakuza 0 was one of the first games I installed on my Ally X, and so I was just playing through that for the most part. It ran fine, which was something I was actually extremely pleased with. Mad Max was another one I was continuing my playthrough on, and that also ran fine, as we discussed earlier. Everything seemed to be going just as well as I wanted it to, given the circumstances. After a week or so, all of the things I'd put up for sale had finally solved, and it left me just enough cash to finally buy all the parts I needed for a PC. So I bought all those parts I needed to, and another 3 days or so later, you know, I had a PC back. You know, you have to take into account delivery times and whatnot. I had it all back. I'd finally upgraded from DDR4 to DDR5, so I was messing around with that and didn't really play these that much, and so they just sort of sat. Another few days later, that PC completely shits the bed. Out of completely nowhere. I have no idea why. I can't get it to work at all. I had no spare parts or anything to test if specific parts were faulty, but I assumed it was either the motherboard or the power supply, and so considering I'd just been paid, I ordered another PSU and motherboard. I tested the new parts the next day, and still nothing worked. I was getting rather panicky at this point, as I didn't have the cash to just buy parts now and wait for the refund on the faulty parts to come through. I bit my tongue, however, and proceeded to send everything back. I knew that because they were all expensive items, it would take a while for them to be processed, and so I waited. Shortly after I sent everything back, I managed to actually get a PS5 Pro on my monthly finance plan attached to my phone bill with EE. This was obviously what I had originally got the normal Ally on, but considering I sent it back, that was open to me again, so I thought, fuck it, I'll get the PS5 Pro. That was my initial plan anyway, so that just sort of coincided pretty well with me not having anything to play with. This was actually really good, because it allowed me to take advantage of the higher resolutions, you know, that my monitor's capable of, and also it really allowed me to throw myself back into some racing, which I was very happy about. Not proper sim racing, mind you, but I threw myself really into Gran Turismo 7 again. Once I exhausted that after a few days, I had the idea of hooking my Ally X up to my monitor and just playing like that, to try and really get the experience of a desktop PC back. And so I did. A few days went by with that sufficing, but I really wanted to play some things like Fortnite with the OG season coming back in early November, and I couldn't do that on Linux, so I resorted to reinstalling Windows on my Ally X. I had a keyboard and mouse attached to it all the time, and without a PC, this would be the next best thing. All of a sudden, I had a PC again. Not a great one, mind you, but a PC is a PC when you had nothing before. So, I ended up being able to do some minor 1080p gaming, but mostly 720p upscaled via lossless scaling, which was something else I wanted to utilise, mainly for the frame generation. This was unfortunately only available on Windows, so, installing Windows on this kind of worked out in that way. I ended up spending most of my time on Gmod, as that was all the poor Ally X could easily do at the performance and fidelity levels I was sort of used to. I also went back and played the first 3 Ratchet & Clank games again. I played the first one about 8 times in 5 days, back to back to back. I was genuinely starting to lose my mind a little bit during all of this. During all of this, because my Ally X was sat at my desk being used as a PC, I needed a handheld. I thought that I would just try and fix my Steam Deck. I was hopeful something may work. Turns out it was a really easy fix, as I mentioned earlier. All I had to do was take this, my WD-40 contact cleaner, spray it into the power button socket a little bit. I mean, that was what it recommended to do, but I had actually taken the device apart to get access to the proper board and where the power button sat. So I sprayed the contacts on the power button, and I just let that do its thing. I gave it about 5 coatings, a minute or so apart, and now it works perfect. First time, screen pops up and goes back down. I had a handheld again. I could turn my Ally X off and then just sit in bed and play on lovely SteamOS. It made me fall in love with the Steam Deck all over again, and this cycle went on for days, then weeks, and then a month. I was in constant contact with Amazon the whole time, as that's where I'd purchased my parts from and sent them back to. Everything bar the CPU I ordered for the new PC were refunded, and it took them a month to get me my money back. They were telling me so many different things, from they can't send it back until I send another part that I didn't even put up for a return back, They also told me that it had already been processed and I just needed to wait. They told me these things so out of order and so just randomly and off the cuff that it was so infuriating. All of that just really stressed me out more, and having these to sort of keep me regulated in that time, absolutely fantastic. During that time, however, while utilising these different devices in different ways, I realised something. I realised that even though my Ally X was the superior device overall, with the power and the fact that I can get a SteamOS experience on this, I ended up pining for this to work. It's the worst device overall, but I just loved using it again. The whole experience felt fresh again, and I knew that despite everything that both devices are capable of, I loved each of them for a different reason. While the Aya Neo was what initially introduced me to the whole handheld PC market, the Steam Deck made me fall in love with it. It made me thoroughly enjoy the prospect of taking what I love doing at home out on the go. It gave me the sort of feeling that a PSP did back when I was a kid. It was such a beautiful and novel feeling. It made me genuinely excited to see what competition would come from this and what would change in the incremental upgrades we would see. I hadn't felt like that in ages, and the Steam Deck made that happen. Even though I made this device for handheld gaming and whatnot, I will always love and adore this device and the curiosity it has given me. That time without a PC made me truly realise that I haven't been this excited about advancements in the game industry since the announcement of the PS4 and the Xbox One way back in 2013. I was only 12 then. Feeling a sense of childhood joy in my early 20s took me by such a surprise I didn't even realise it until a year later. And that is why I love this thing. To me, it's more than just a device, a handheld PC, a gaming machine, whatever you want to call it. It's a symbol, a memory, an experience. This device is like the PS2 for me. I absolutely love it. It's my favourite console ever. I'm sure it is the same for many of you out there. I still go back and enjoy the classics from time to time. I mentioned Ratchet & Clank earlier, that originated on there. And I would defend that console until the end of the earth. Do I insist that it's the best now though? No, not at all. That's just because it isn't anymore. This device has paved the way for the handheld industry, and every single handheld I have seen has tried to copy it in some way, shape or form, no matter how minimal the feature included may have been. That's why I say in my video, it is the most important device in the industry for the god knows past how many years. Anyway, enough of me speaking my wise words. You want to know if this is still worth it for you in the big year of 2024 and soon to be 2025. Short answer, yes. Long answer, it depends. A handheld is definitely something you should invest in if you enjoy the gaming industry and have been looking at one for a while. It's truly a novel way of playing some of your favourites. Even now, I often see myself just thinking, how the hell did they get this to run on a device that fits in my hands? Whenever I play Cyberpunk or Resident Evil 4, it's such a unique experience being able to play it on something that, in my mind, resembles a PSP. Like, that's crazy. The fact that I can play games that I used to play sat at a TV in my hand is insane to me. Having used the Steam Deck and other devices now, I think I definitely have more of an opinion on whether you should get a Steam Deck or whether you should get another competition device instead. One thing you're going to have to understand when going into this is that every single device is going to have its benefits and its drawbacks. The Steam Deck is no different. Part of me is actually really glad that this device isn't perfect, because it then allows others to come in and try and better it where it falls short. You know, that's exactly what competition is, and I'm all here for it in this industry. If you are in the market for one of these, you need to have a goal already in mind. You know, what sort of games do you want to play? Is this something where you want to play Cyberpunk on a device like this just because it can run on a device like this? Or do you just want to kick back with some Balatro and other non-intensive indie games? The Steam Deck may be the choice for you if you want some lower intensity titles like indie games or older games like Half-Life 2. Something like the Ally X or even the newly released One X Fly from One X Player might be the option for you if you want more intensive titles to run at decent settings. You might also have to take into account things like the operating system. SteamOS is a very lightweight and easy to use bit of software purpose built for the Steam Deck, and it sort of resembles the sort of firmware and software you would see on your PlayStation, your Xbox, or your Nintendo Switch. It's very easy, very purpose built, very built around games, and it's so easy to use and figure out. You also have Windows devices, in which manufacturers will slap their own proprietary bloatware onto it in order to try and emulate the feeling of SteamOS with the safety of Windows. Windows tends to constantly fight for control, however, which can make the user experience a bit unbearable for a lot of people, especially like myself, unless you use it as a PC with a mouse and keyboard always attached. From my research, it has also seemed to be that Windows will also sap a lot of performance in some areas that SteamOS might not, so try to keep that in mind as well. There are alternatives for devices like this that don't come pre-installed with SteamOS, like Bazzite. It essentially emulates SteamOS and is built for devices like the Ally X and the Legion Go, etc. You can get it for the regular Steam Deck as well, but you might as well just stick with regular SteamOS. They're going to work in harmony, like the hardware and the software is going to work so much better together with just the regular old SteamOS. You know, this sort of thing, Bazzite may be very beneficial for you if you are, well versed in OS installation or soft modding. It may not be for you if that is completely alien to you, and that's fair enough. You may want something like the Ally or the Ally X if you prefer competitive titles. That sleek 120Hz display, combined with the fact that competitive titles are easier to run and also always run on Windows, make that a very viable option for you. You may want to play the more cinematic games with engaging stories, and so the Legion Go might be your best bet. That huge screen and detachable controller design mean that you can just post up somewhere and chill with a game of Elden Ring or something. Battery life is also a huge factor with these devices. As mentioned previously when we talked about it, the Ally X has a huge 80 Wh battery that can easily be taken advantage of with the right circumstances, as I mentioned earlier. This might be the option for you if you regularly go to places in which wall power isn't exactly an option, or if you don't have a battery pack or simply don't like using them. If you do have access to wall power often but also enjoy the increased horsepower, then a regular Ally might do the trick for you. You have a bit more free reign if you don't mind using a battery pack and have one available, or plan on getting one along with your device. Price-wise, the Steam Deck is going to be your best bet. The regular Ally is a lot cheaper now that the Ally X exists, and so an OLED deck as well as an Ally will probably set you back the same sort of amount. The LCD deck that I have here is still a fantastic device and I love using it still, and just because it's a little older doesn't mean that it's useless or not good at anything. This is still going to take basically anything you throw at it. These are still a serious option for people, and there is a very good reason for that. Valve's own refurbished service for the LCD decks sells out so quick, so people are still buying these in droves. If you don't care that much about power and have a bit extra to spend, an OLED might be a shout for you. If you want the best and have the money to get it, then the One X Fly might be your option. That thing is an absolute beast, like 32 gigs of RAM, 1080p, OLED, I think it's got a Ryzen 7 8840U or something. That thing is a powerhouse. If you're clumsy and worried about repairability, like me, then the deck might be your go-to. Their support system in combination with their iFixit partnership and overall modular nature of the device make it a very attractive option for those that like to tinker and repair. It might not be as easy to acquire replacements, but the Ally and the Ally X might also be decent options with its removable triggers, analog sticks, and SSDs obviously, it's still a decent option. Accessories wise, you know, if you're someone that likes to thoroughly customize or protect your device with things like cases and skins, the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally are great bets. The Ally X not so much at the moment, as it's still, you know, a fairly new device, but in the coming months I'm sure we will see some higher quality third-party accessories available on Amazon. I'm not too sure about the Legion Go or other brands, as I don't own any of them, but like with anything, if that specific thing on your is on your radar, then you'd be better off doing your own research. Basically, what I'm trying to say with all of this is that there are so many variables out there that can dictate what will be the right device for you. My best advice is to take a little bit of time to decide what you really want out of your device. Do you want something powerful that you can install a version of SteamOS on? Ally X might be for you. Do you want something where you don't care that much about performance, but just want something to do while you sit on the sofa while your estranged kids watch Skibbity Toilet or whatever the hell they watch nowadays? Then this will be for you. That's all I can really offer in guidance. I think these devices are absolutely fantastic, and you should definitely invest in one if you are thinking about it. And yes, while they all do the same thing, they all do the same thing a little differently. Find your preference and your range of games that you want and work from there. For me, I like slightly more intensive games and emulation. While I do enjoy a wide range of older and less intensive games, I really enjoy the novelty idea of playing something like Cyberpunk or Resident Evil 4 out and about. Emulation, as I say, is also a huge thing for me, and it's very, very intensive, so a device like this that can handle PS3 emulation like it's nothing is definitely a huge bonus. Having that much power in a device that you can almost fit in your pocket provides a weird feeling of power that I really, really like. That is why the Ally X, I think, is absolutely perfect for me. As much as I'd like the One X Fly, the Ally X is from a much more reputable brand and will last for ages just because of how amazing and powerful it is. I love this little device, and I plan to continue loving it for years to come. That sounded a hell of a lot better in my head, Jesus Christ. I can only hope that you enjoy either one that you have, or the one that you get. There's a device for everyone out there. You just gotta find which one suits you best. Well, that pretty much does it for me today. You know, I thoroughly enjoy making these videos. I'd like to think that comes across with the amount of effort and time I put into them, you know. This is the third time I've done this whole video, so that should tell you something. I love these devices, and sharing that interest and knowledge with you lovely lot is an absolute pleasure, and I do feel so honoured that people in their droves come to these videos and share their opinions in the comments below. It truly makes my day when people tell me that my videos have been funny or informative to them, so if you're one of those people, you are noticed, and I thoroughly thank you for such feedback. Reading those comments really brings a smile to my face, and so, you know, with that, that's enough from me then. I'm uploading this on Christmas, and so many of you will want to get back to gorging on some delicious seasonal scran, while others go off and do whatever devious activities you get up to on the holidays. All I can only hope for is that your 2025 is much better than the 2020s have seemed to be thus far. It can only get better, you know, really. I've said it now, fuck up. You know what, I'm sorry, if anything bad happens, you can single-handedly blame this video and me for calling attention to it. I hope you guys have or have had a fantastic Christmas, and have or have had an even better New Year, depending on when you see this. Thank you all so much for the support. It helps me more than you could ever know. And with that, it's Gception signing off. Bye bye, guys.